gonna see if I'm going live. Ooh, there was a new button.
Uh-oh.
There's a new button.
Cool.
Setting up your meeting for Facebook Live. Done. Redirecting to Facebook Live page. Oh my God. Is it working?
Is it working?
Live?
Oh,
Yay!
I see you. Wow. There was a new button.
There's a new button. Okay, now I need to name our meeting. There's a slight redirecting to Facebook Live page. Oh my God. Is it working? Is it working? Live? Yay!
I see you. I think it's overlapping.
Yay! Now I'm going in ripples and circles. Okay, stop.
There was a new button.
There's a new button. Okay, now I need to name our meeting.
Wow, what was all that? That was crazy.
Oh my God. Is it working? Live? Yay!
I see you. I think it's overlapping. Okay. Now what?
Oh my God. I don't know what to do.
I don't know.
There's tools. Are we just live now? Are we live now with no scary craziness? Is that happening?
I don't know.
I don't know. Nope. Oh my God. Okay, what about now? Can you hear me now? But Dina, is it working? Can you hear me? Okay. Maybe we'll just start. I've muted the Facebook page. Can you hear me, Emily?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Well, maybe it just does not work if I try to watch it at the same time. Rubbish echo. Yes. Totally, Dave. Thank you. I think I just need to get off the
rubbish echo.
Okay, I turned off the Facebook page, so I'm hoping that might actually work now.
Okay.
And I'm just gonna go ahead and pretend like everything's working. Dina, please let me know if it's not, okay? Thanks, buddy. All right, yay! If it's working, then terrific. Yay, here we are with my dear friend, Emily Willingham.
Hi.
Your patience, Emily. What a pleasure to have you. We have just been reminiscing about our good old times back in the day at conferences, just being nerds and geeking out over so many crazy, beautiful sexual things that we've always enjoyed talking about. And so when I saw you had a new book, I was just thrilled that you could come and talk to me. But I want to introduce you. So Emily is a journalist and science writer whose PhD and postdoc in urology came after she got a degree in English literature. I love how you are an artist and a scientist. Your writing has appeared everywhere: Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, San Francisco Chronicle, and of course, you're a regular at Scientific American. Thank you so much, Emily, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, I love the book.
Thank you.
Loved the book. How long have you been working on it?
I started working on this, I don't know, what is time right now? Actually, I feel like I started working on it sometime in 2019. I think that's right. Spring 2019. Yeah.
2019. Yeah. Okay. And one thing that immediately grabbed me about the book, and I'm really hoping that we can sort of allow it to inform our conversation, is just how you literally grab the interpretation and the general thoughts about sexuality and penises and the fallacy of the phallus. You grab that by the balls, man, and you just totally turn it on its head.
Well, I hope not literally. That sounds rude, but yeah, sure.
It takes such a wonderful feminist perspective.
Thank you.
That's something I have been, literally waiting for in the sexual realm for absolutely ages. So let's start there. How did you come to the conclusion that, this was a perspective, the feminist perspective is something that really played a role in the crafting and the structuring of your framework for the book?
Well, thank you for that question. It's kind of a Trojan horse sort of book because it purports to be about penises, but I don't know if you noticed the central chapter is actually about vaginas.
Okay.
And the the arc of the book is that yes, this is about penises, but the life lessons for us, for our penis, is that we should probably decenter it. You know, if you're talking about a spectrum of penises from wow to ours is not really on the wow end of things when you start to read about things like seed beetles and stuff like that. And so I felt like we've gotten into this kind of cultural moment where people are sending dick pics out and everybody's a dick and they've got small dick energy if they do this thing,
True.
all the kind of stuff. And they really have we've reduced people with penises to, either you have a huge one and then you're a man, or you don't have one and you're not a man. So I wanted to get, especially in the last chapter of the book, to taking a step back from that, decentering our penis, because in the vast array of them,
Not even that impressive.
not very central,
Okay.
and to kind of focus more on the complexities of our behavior and our brains instead.
And that I 100%, I feel like from my audience's energy, from all the work that I've done, that is a perspective that people want to sort of take the focus off of the phallic part and to actually allow our brains to be the ones that engage us in our sex lives. This really came through for me a lot in your chapter and your examples that you wrote about with intersex. And maybe that I wasn't going to start here, but we've kind of just ended right there. So you talk about intersex a lot, and especially how it's observable not only in some human populations, but readily observable in a lot of animals. And that is, for those of you listening, animals that run the spectrum of sexual identities, as we as biologists can identify them by looking at genitalia and morphologies. And I remember specifically you said something, oh yeah, for a pig example.
Mm-hmm.
The pigs on Vanuatu were arranged by some scientists from the most female looking ones to the most male looking ones. Can you talk to me about that a little bit and describe what
Sure.
that phenomenon is?
He seemed to think that there would be this spectrum and that they needed to be arranged in this way. Like, how much did they adhere to a binary that was set instead of by features maybe that they shared, and that they would be grouped by these features instead? And to take a little bit of a step back, these pigs, like 20% of them or something on Vanuatu, are this sort of have this inherited kind of mixed sex features. And so it's heritable, and they have their own, there's a very good sized population of them, but they do have variations in how they manifest these traits. And he just sort of felt, this was probably 100 years ago, right, that he was writing about him, but he felt this really urgent need to kind of try to categorize them just from most female to most male, instead of like, oh, they all have this trait together, regardless of what that trait was. I thought that was interesting that he chose to bucket it that way.
I completely agree. And this is, like you said, 100 years ago, a scientist that's looking at variability in genitalia and actually taking a step back and breaking free from that binary, like you said. How come, in your opinion, wasn't that work far more celebrated and far more out there? Because I think of humans and I think, yeah, we are non-binary. There's so much about humans that's non-binary.
Sure. Our genital development certainly happens on a continuum, and even for greater complexity, obviously, the development of our brains is on an even more complex, multidimensional set of continua. And I think that things like that perhaps go overlooked, or have gone overlooked, because they don't fit the preconceived notion of everything is going to fit into this category, or it's going to fit in this category, and there are only two categories, which, as the book points out over and over again, is not the case. I mean, even, there are plenty of examples of animals that make eggs, that make oocytes, that actually have what a lot of people would think of as a penis, for example. So there's no absolute. And, the rule of biology is nothing's ever 100%. That's the only 100% rule of biology. And this book, lots and lots and lots and lots of exceptions to what people tend to think about binaries. So
Absolutely. And I think that, what you really get on in the book, and especially in the beginning too, is that this sort of haunting binary is what has informed most of what we know about culture. I mean, westernized culture, absolutely. What are your thoughts on that? How instead of actually embracing diversity, we've gone almost completely socially binary in a lot of ways.
But we're really constrained in that way. And I mean, humans like to categorize things, you know that, right? We like, look behind you, you've got the little drawers, and I'm sure things in those drawers behind you are categorized in some way, right? We really like
junk, and more junk. Yeah.
the thing. The thing is that even within the binary, we haven't paid a whole lot of attention to one part of the binary. I mean, one of the things I write about in the book, is that when it comes to research in genitalia, we have spent a whole lot of time on penises, or what I call intramita in the book, and much, much, much less time on the other side of the genitalic handshake, what these things go into. So the reason for that, as I'm sure you're a woman and a scientist, is who's been asking the questions and who's been deciding how they're going to be answered. So
yes,
100%. We're missing that picture. So
I want to just grab onto one quote that you wrote that totally goes along with that. It's on 278. And it's basically how, the determinant, this is back to the children. So this is non-binary work in children in Papua New Guinea. And instead of the human minds around them and the culture that those minds created, they had a choice to be who they were outside of their genitalia. That's really struck a big chord for me. And you celebrate a lot of Patricia Brennan's work, who is someone who is very much into looking at the other side of of that major binary, which is the vagina. So tell me what you learned about vaginas in your work.
So I have two observations to make about Patricia Brennan. First of all, she pioneers this, right? She's one of the first people in vertebrates to really take a look at this. Ducks, as you know, are infamous because they have these corkscrew ballistic penises, or some of them do, because there's forced copulation with ducks. And the idea is that the more bells and whistles, the idea still is, the more bells and whistles a penis has, there's kind of more tension between the two copulatory partners, right?
Yes.
And the fewer bells and whistles, the less tension, and the more you have like courtship and establishing intimacy and checking boxes to make sure everybody's on board together, right? But if you think that the male duck is, has these adaptive features to get past something, in non-consensual copulation, you would think the female would have some sort of concordant features or discordant features, right? Also that are adaptive. But for some reason, before Patricia Brennan looked at female ducks, no one
literally
that side of things.
Recently, yeah.
And so the year she did that is what really strikes me. It was 2005. It was
not that long ago.
Before somebody looked at that, meanwhile, the close examination of all kinds of, penises on the male animals up until that point.
Absolutely. And I love how not only did she sort of launch into really wanting to solve some of those mysteries, she's done so in such creative and interesting ways that I would sort of argue are perhaps a little more female-minded, if I might go that way. Creative ways. Tell me about some of her vaginal modeling stuff.
Right. So she has done a lot of work with cetaceans. I would characterize them as sort of found cetaceans, right? They're not going out and actually harvesting them or anything. And that's whales. And so you're looking at, dolphins and other whales. And she does these things where she gets, the penis, and then she acquires a vagina and she fixes them. What else does she do? She puts them through these little techniques so they're kind of fixed in place, and she puts them together and sews them up and then scans them, right? So that you can see from the inside out how they fit together. And
okay, wait. Let me just set the scene. She's like literally in a lab, blowing air into an actual previously frozen penis.
And so because these are whales, right? We're talking about stuff that's really big and pretty resistant. And so at least for some of them, they had to use a beer keg, like a mini beer keg, had enough power to just sort of inflate it enough so that they could get it into an erect, right, status, so that they could then combine it with the vagina and sew them together and do their imaging on it.
I think this is something that, people don't necessarily appreciate about evolutionary biologists and behavioral biologists is, it isn't really that easy to observe copulation, especially for something like a cetacean that is aquatic. I mean, we don't swim. Of course, whales don't go too far from the surface. They need to breathe, but we don't know a ton about whale copulation. So for this scientist to actually seek out the specific tissues she needed, aka the genitals, and inflate them in a lab is potentially one of the first times we've actually gotten a really good look at how whale sex functions. Certainly, we've seen maybe some of those famous pictures of whales washed up, and you can see how large the penis is. But tell me what's interesting about the vagina, though, in the whales. This is what I thought was so neat, similar to the ducks.
It's the same kind of thing, right? And so where if you've got sort of adaptive traits on the penis of the whale, then you find that there are sort of disconsonant, I'm not going to say that they're concordant, it's more discordant adaptive traits in the vaginas, right? And that's something that you see in a lot of species once you bother to look, once you actually look. And she's now looked at several species of whales, it's not just one. And it's not perfect. It's not like you're really watching the act, but gosh, it's the best we have so far, and it's 2020, right?
Right. It's so good what we have. Because I think those kinds of things haven't gotten any easier to observe. At least maybe drones,
but whales, I'm sure you can't just go up and be like, hey buddy.
Exactly. Like that would just be so hard. And so hitting on this theme of the fact that it is now, her work started in 2005 to kind of go down, hey, what are we looking at with these vaginas? You've talked about in your book a lot about the scientific men's clubs. So tell me a little bit about what your line of thinking is. That you start off with this right in the beginning, and I think that's why it just kind of plowed me over. I wasn't expecting it right away, and then it came, and I was like, yes, so good.
It's a lot of studies that purport to look at what women want, right, as sexually, they don't really look at that, and instead they look at what men could do with their penises with women, and how many women might actually appreciate what they can do with a penis inserted into a vagina, not into anything else, just a vagina, right? And there's just a whole lot of just how can we find out how much this penis can do if we put it in a vagina? That's not asking what women want. And it's also making a lot of assumptions about who has penises and what they're doing with them. And the reason for that, like I've said, is because up until pretty recently, like 2005, to look at a duck vagina, right? The people asking and answering these questions have largely been men. And then you get somebody like Patricia Brennan at Mount Holyoke coming onto the scene. She's got this duck. They're dissecting ducks just to look at this one part of the vagina for completely kind of unrelated reasons. And she's like, I want to look at this whole thing. And that kind of kicks it off, at least for vertebrates, that we finally started to look at that stuff.
Exactly. And so the notion that the questions being asked have been centered by the people asking them, and potentially also centered in the specific personal sexual experiences of those scientists themselves. Would that be fair to say?
I would say at least their aspirations, because it would seem to be that their aspirations are all about what can I accomplish sexually to super impress a woman's sex partner with this penis. Like that seems to be the big question, And I do talk about a couple of studies in that first chapter that don't ask the question that way, that do actually look at what women want on that side of the equation. And it has not so much to do with that, right? Like there's a big focus on these studies that that have been conducted by some men of that length of the penis. But when you survey women about it, that's not actually the top feature for a lot of them, certainly not even the majority of them. Width seems to be at least as important. And what they find more important is what else you do. I mean, we have this whole bodies, right?
What
But
else you got? Yeah.
you know, the funniest line, I don't have it in front of me, but there's some, kind of amusing line. It's like, what they really like is a lot of attention to the clitoral area. It's like huge surprise.
Right? Like,
You think?
well, it's such that, applying those questions to the animal kingdom is actually very rare. To say, what do these female chimps actually want? I mean, as biologists, I remember when I was, in my training, we would assume that everything an animal did was to increase in some way their biological fitness, or the chances that they'll get to pass on those blueprints. What if it doesn't? What if a female is just enjoying something? Is there a possibility for that in these studies too?
There's a whole school. I had a section on it, but then I took it out. Just a huge amount of attention about why female orgasms persist in humans and in
Mhm.
chimpanzees and bonobos. And it's just this really fraught question. Like, my God, why are they having these still? What possible
It
adaptive
shouldn't be that fun for them.
But the thing is that I don't like to just point to a single species and go, look at this example. But I mean, bonobos are our closest relatives. And I'm not going to make this huge mistake and say, well, here we go. But when you look at how they use those behaviors, female to female, it's obviously a bonding thing.
Yeah.
And, I think if you take a step back and you stop looking at genital contact as purely a sexual thing and more of it can be a bonding thing, just like the bonobos use it, then there can be, if you everything has to be framed by adaptive and evolution and fitness, there can be an adaptive advantage to that because you've got your village there, right? And I think
Such
bonobos
a
are matriarchal and they're making their friends, they've got their allo parents there, everybody's caring for those offspring together, and they're cementing bonds by having this process together.
Yeah, yeah, and I've read sort of.
Speculation, just to be clear, I don't want bonobo people coming to yell at me, but
What? Do you think they would yell at you? No, aren't bonobo people all happy and touchy-feely and, I always tell people, my audience is to channel their inner bonobo. Look for your inner bonobo, ignore your inner chimp. I've read that, when females orgasm with each other, there's a lot of soul, like it's written as soulful eye gazing. And I remember thinking, what? How, somebody's writing about that? I mean, I thought, but how else maybe do you describe that? As, it is actually a thing that perhaps it isn't actually penis to vagina, but it's important.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that there's some diminishment of the importance of female-female bonding in kind of just trying to make that strictly adaptive for the purposes of reproductive copulation or whatever, instead of some other form of using that behavior for some other form of bonding.
Yeah, and they're not really exclusive of one another, I guess. It's
Right.
impossible to tease those out. So another angle that you take early on in the book, you are critical of the field of evolutionary psychology. And I think for some of these same reasons that certain phenomena are impossible to tease out from one another. Tell me about what your thoughts are on the field.
I'm not critical of the entire field. I think there could be utility in approaching things from a certain perspective, but it seems to be exploitative in a lot of ways. The studies I describe in the first chapter certainly come across as quite exploitative.
Yeah,
And it does seem to be something that a certain kind of male researcher is particularly fond of. And I think one of the reasons for that is, again, because they get to ask these questions and just kind of answer them in a way that is pretty self-serving and aspirational for them. And I feel like if you can mold your science and how you address questions in that way, perhaps it's not, excuse me, the stiffest kind of science you could be.
Yeah, and how pervasive of an issue is that in the field, would you say?
Well, I would say that when studies like those come out, like one of the studies is called the quote stripper study, and it purported to associate a woman's ovulatory cycle or ovulation with how much tips they were getting, right? Whether or not
infamous study, really, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and it was small. They never directly measured hormones. They really didn't know if the women were ovulating. A bunch of them were on birth control and still had these cycles of tips, and there are all kinds of other explanations. But they tried to cast it in economic terms, and then also tried to kind of make it as though women were sort of both somehow simultaneously being sort of sneaky about ovulation, which is considered hidden in us. It's hidden in a lot of animals, actually, though. But at the same time leaking these cues, quote unquote, that they were ovulating and then getting more tips. I mean, you're a woman. If you found out that people who were dancing professionally like that were getting more tips at a certain time of month, how would you like frame a study like that, and how would you design it, right? They did an online survey, they got very few responses, and then they blew it up into this study that they published, and it got a lot of attention, as I point out in the chapter. That, that's not rigid science, excuse me again, but
you can't get away from it, like it's everywhere.
Yeah, every time you say, you're like, hard, stiff, just,
rigid.
But it's there are much better ways if you're genuinely wanting to find out what's going on there.
And I guess just for the audience too, the whole notion of evolutionary psychology is where we kind of fit humanity into evolutionary biology, and how we can sort of come to any kind of conclusion or even lend weight to any hypothesis by doing experiments on ourselves that involve our sexuality and our great big brain. For me, it's a bit of a hot mess. Very entertaining, very interesting.
They try to draw inferences about what the mental state of people is, and is there some evolutionary substrate that makes it adaptive or not. I think it's passed on so that men want to be this way because of this, and women want to be this way because of that. And it's a lot of the thing that annoys me the most about it is that I think that much of it is sexist and a ton of it is just so stories. And I just don't think that that's, I mean, obviously it's not like a novel thing to say. I don't think that's how science should be.
Yeah, this is it. But I guess in framing the discussion of sex, sexuality, and sort of the phallus, it's got problems from many sides, I guess you could say, from the initial perspective of the way that studies are devised to this potential for socioeconomic factors coming into scientific research. So how do you see this kind of work moving forward? I mean, it's clear that our brains are making us so incredibly difficult to study. How can we look to animals? How can we make it better? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I don't think that, so we're separated from our nearest living relative by millions of years. And so I think it's difficult to look at animals and take something wholesale from them, obviously. Mm-hmm. I think it's also actually pretty difficult to take even little things from them and go, oh, well, there's our model for that, because we're sui generis. We are the only living members of our genus. So there are rigorous ways to go about evaluating human behavior and measuring these things. But they don't involve just kind of like throwing something out because it looks cool to you because you're a person with a penis, and then taking it from there.
Well, and just kind of thinking about a lot of science and academia, that's who's there to do those studies. So, I mean, it's kind of one of those problems that needs to shake out from the bottom up. I like to think
of course. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that one of the first person to publish about duck vaginas was a woman. I don't think that that's remotely a coincidence,
Right. Yeah. Whereas the duck penis is just like, yeah.
I remember seeing something about those. It was Argentinian something duck in 1995 at Nature, and so what are you, 10 years later, and then you get somebody who looks at a female and publishes about it. Like, why didn't you go immediately and go, well, that's wacky. That looks like
the other 50% of that.
On the other side, Oh, no. I mean, I quote the guy and, Bunny Austin, who wrote this big review in 1985. And he was just like, we just sort of figure there's not that much going on that side of things. And I'm just like, they talk about how wonderfully, gloriously variable, penises are in nature. And then they're like, no, we figure the vaginas are just holes.
Yeah, it's the hole. Just the hole.
It's a hole. It's a hole.
Okay. So what about animals that kind of just do have the hole? And those ones I'm thinking of, birds and many other animals that have, instead of a penis and a vagina, they have something called a cloaca, which is an opening that serves both for digestive system products as well as sexual system products. And you write about the cloacal kiss.
Right. So
Tell me all about that romance.
It's an all-purpose exit, and in this case, also an all-purpose transmitter. And it means sewer, which doesn't sound very attractive, but yes, they do. They just dispense with things through this. And animals, vertebrates that don't have a penis, one of the things they could do, they go have cloacae, right? And the two copulating partners can bring their cloacae together, and it is called a cloacal kiss, which kind of just depends on your level of tolerance for disgust. But when they do that, it does, because it requires that level of intimacy, right, to bring them together. And then they can transmit gametes, right? One partner can transmit gametes to the other. And one of the things you find, I have this whole sequence in one of the later chapters of the Tuatara, and how much they go through to get to the point of mating. It's just like bananas. It was like so many hours of just like walking around, like checking each other out and stuff. And they do a cloacal kiss, which is unusual for like other vertebrates in that kind of area, like lizards and snakes and stuff. The Tuataras, none of those things. And to get that close to something and to bring your little sewers together, it seems like it's
pretty intimate.
Take a bit of agreement there, in a lot of cases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, because that's biology for you. But yeah, you got to check some boxes. Tuatara, they take a long time to get to that point. So.
And the Tuatara is such an interesting example for a number of reasons. Tell me a little bit more about this crazy New Zealand organism.
They, like us, are the only living representative of their genus, and so I feel kind of a kinship with them. Not because of Cloacal Kiss, but because of that, and because they don't have penises, but like sort of other organisms in that general taxonomic area, the snakes and lizards and crocodilians and turtles all do. And also the array of penises across those animals is, can get kind of nutty, right? Especially snakes and lizards. They got, two-headed penises, and they can have spikes and all kinds of things on them. But the Tuatara, and there's nothing. And so for a long time, there was some discussion around how many times had a penis, arisen in these egg-laying animals, land animals. Was it a bunch? Was it just once? And nobody was quite sure. But then a group in Florida, University of Florida, they found out that there were these century-old samples of Tuatara embryos in a museum collection that had been sliced up. And you can't collect Tuatara eggs now because they're extremely, endangered. You can't go near them because we screwed everything up for them, 100 years ago. But they got so lucky with this. They found these just the right stage of development to look at the structure that genitalia grow from in the embryo. The structure is called the genital tubercle. And so they got this Tuatara at just the right stage, and they looked at it, and it actually had started to grow a little penis. And
during development,
because this is at the base of that tree, right, of these other egg-laying animals, that meant that was present at the base of the tree for all of these other animals, which, as I call it in the book, makes it the one penis to rule them all, because it meant that it evolved, at the base of that tree.
Yeah, and yet
you're not thereafter, right?
Yeah, and it's a developmental thing. It's an ontogenetic thing, right? Like it happens during development, and then it never manifests.
Right. And so what you can, like, for example, another thing I talk about is there's just this protein that if it gets made, then the penis will go away. If it doesn't get made, it will stick around. And so that's a difference between ducks and chickens, essentially, because chickens don't, make a penis, but ducks do.
Yeah.
You can actually flip it for them and get ducks not to make one in the embryonic stage and get chickens to make one. So it's still using that developmental program and just kind of using it differently, just depending on whether the trait's adaptive for them. I guess.
So that speaks to the fact that this would be an evolutionarily shared trait then.
Yeah, they all have the, it's there if they need it. It's there if there's like, some mutation that makes chickens suddenly start making those again, and it gives them some advantage reproductively. Maybe it'll stick around in the population, and chickens will have penises again or something.
Right. And I love this plasticity in the nature of what is expressed in terms of sexuality and in terms of genitalia. This takes me to the falloid weaver, which is another bird that you talk about. It doesn't have it still has a cloaca, right? But it has this falloid thing. What is that?
Yeah, that little thing just makes me laugh. It's the buffalo weaver. What makes me laugh is what the researchers did with that thing, right? Because it has this little it's just something, it's a little bit erect, right? Part of they call it a falloid organ or something like that. It's just part of the cloaca extends just a little bit, but they created like a female weaver bird mate for the male. I guess he just found that just wow, she was such a babe. And so they had buffalo weavers go and sort of get it on with these taxidermy.
Just another day of work. Just
another evidence of their enjoyment, right? And the researchers are like, oh, that's exactly what's going on. They come down and they beat their little wings. They're like, wee, this is the greatest thing, And then this is what makes me laugh. Apparently that wasn't enough, right? For the researchers, they actually, with their own researcher hands, actually made that little falloid thing kind of ejaculate too. And I was thinking,
so basically what you're saying in a very polite way is that these researchers masturbated the birds.
They did for science. They checked every box. They thoroughly demonstrated that that's what that thing was doing and what was coming out right there.
And who has the reactable falloid in that case? It's the males or the females or both?
Yeah, it's the male in that. I don't think, here's a good one. I don't recall that they mentioned the female side of that. This was the male that they looked at. Yeah.
And was it this is complete curiosity, but was it the males that were also performing
the scientists? Yes, they were all. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all on that same thing. No, I'm sure there's some males who wouldn't do that.
Probably not a coincidence. Anyway, it was just reading, and the weaver birds are really indiscriminate too. They'll just kind of go after anything that's within a reasonable size range, whether it's their species or
not. Right? Which we know a lot of animals kind of indiscriminately have sex because actually it cost benefit actually makes more sense to just give it a try. I know
it'd be your one shot, may as well go for it, right?
Well, this is it, right? Now I have so many fun things I want to ask you about before I let you go. Oh my God, talk to me about daisy chains. Talk to me about because I love nudibranchs. I'm going to ask you 2 nudibranch questions.
I knew you would. I was like, oh my God, she's going to know so much more about nudibranchs than I do. But these are really, there's so many hermaphroditic animals, right? Especially in that group of animals. And so as a result, they have a side, the way we describe them anyway, they have a female side and a male side. They're like a box, and they'll align themselves in what have been described as daisy chains, because they'll actually orient so that there's male, female, male, female, male, female, and they'll all just kind of have these little copulatory chains that they engage in. And I could see where that's just like, you just get it done, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Boom, got it done here, coming at you this direction. Everybody's finished. Maybe didn't get eaten, and you can just move on, right?
It gets it done. Gets the sperm transfer essentially taken care of.
Gametes are taken care of. Let's just, get out of here before something finds us and eats
comes along. Now, here's a question though about the hermaphroditic animals, because there's a lot of research looks at snails and slugs in particular. Yeah. Is research in hermaphrodites primarily dominated by interest in the male part of the hermaphrodite, or?
I can't say in any scientific sense that is the case, but when you ask me that question, I think about all that I've seen about it, and mostly what you hear about are the penises, right? The penis side of things. And so, really famous Limax maximus slugs, right? They're really large. They have these penises that come out, and the penises look like little, animals if they're in their own right, and they intertwine all this other stuff. But you don't really hear so much about what they're going into.
Yeah, you don't. You really don't.
You really don't. or when you hear about hypodermic insemination, where there's a needle-like intermittent, right, and they're jobbing about the head of the animal or something. Well, in that case, it's a head, so I guess you're not gonna hear about a vagina with that. But you know, you're right. I'm scanning this and I'm thinking, yeah, still not, right?
Still not.
Which in a sense is amazing because that means there's more to be done. Like there's still more to discover out there, right? Which I always like feeling. And when it comes to science, you know, I don't want to feel like, well, that's all over.
I agree. And hermaphrodites just present such a huge conundrum, a huge puzzle. You've kind of alluded to it, but take me through these beautiful siphonopteran nudibranchs, the yellow and red ones.
They're so pretty. They're so pretty. And I think I should mention the video, right? So people can go find a video of these things. But yeah, they and some of them don't have species names yet, right? They're
they're brand new.
But they form, you know, kind of these, what's that, a yin yang kind of thing like this, and they spin, and it's really beautiful to watch. Like if you just need a moment to kind of zen, maybe you could go watch that. Really quite beautiful. And then they'll just, like I said, they'll just job about, right? And there's one species, is this siphonoptera where they have the eye spots, right?
Yeah.
The video of this. There's little eye spots, and they've got this kind of, it does come out almost like a hypodermic needle, the penis, right? And then another little point comes out of it, and it kind of, not just kind of jobbing about, it goes directly between the eyes, right? And kind of injects semen, and you can kind of see the partner just kind of going, okay, hope got good aim. The little eye spot. I'm sorry, I'm anthropomorphizing that. I'm gonna make people mad at me, but it's really fun to watch.
It's literally like it's literally stabbing them in the head. I mean,
they're just right there in between the eyes, and I think this is still early days probably with these, but you know, one potential implication is that there's some, you know, chemical kind of modification.
I'm very excited to read more about that. I was so happy to see it in your book because I'm like waiting with bated breath for more of their work.
I know that's your thing.
It's totally my thing. Yeah. It's totally my thing. I mean, you got to have a thing, right? Okay, talk to me just a little bit about your elephant seal experience. You went on location.
This is this is such a thing, because to me it was this real lesson in trying to use a human gaze for things, right? So at Point Reyes National Seashore, they have a parking lot. It's the Drake's Beach is what it's called, and they have elephant seals that come there and they mate and stuff. And so there are big bulls and little bulls and females and all this other stuff. And they had taken over the parking lot. Like they had closed everything. I forget why, maybe for fires or something. And so for the longest time, the seals didn't have access to the parking lot. And now suddenly they did. They were just all over the place. And so people got really excited about this and started coming out to see them, because it was about as close as you could ever get, because you're supposed to stay very far away.
Very unusual. Yeah.
Yeah. You leave them alone, right? Stay far away. And so we came out one day to watch this, and we're standing there, and right in front of us is this thing that looks like a sandbar. And all of a sudden we see all this action going on. A female, she starts kind of, you can't call it running because they're pinnipeds, right? But she starts flipping away, right? And these males are coming at her and kind of triangulating on her. And one of them seems like he's trying to just force, have non-consensual copulation with her, and she does all this stuff, and he goes away, and another one comes in, and that happens again. You're just like, oh my God, this is like really hard to watch, right? Because she does not want this to happen, and then all of a sudden, right in front of us, the thing that we thought was a sandbar just explodes. This huge bull, just enormous, goes out to her and does he copulates with her, and the other males are like, they're just gone.
Oh, they're just gone because he's the alpha.
So, right, and we're just like, holy cats. And so we go to talk to one of the rangers, and she said that the day before something very similar had happened, except it happened right in the parking lot. And she was like, she wasn't really laughing about it, but she was just like, yeah, there was blood everywhere. Children were crying. We were just like, oh my God. And so we tried to unpack this on the way home. We were like, oh my, you don't call it rape because that's kind of a legal, right, structure. It looked like forced copulation. But then I'm looking into pinnipeds because they have baculum, the penis bone, and all this other stuff. I find this paper that describes exactly what we saw, that this is what northern elephant seals do. And that actually what's going on is the female is sorting males. Okay. And she's like, there's this demonstration that those two males that didn't succeed, she flipped sand at them. She didn't make her, she curled her tail, didn't make herself available and all these other things. And this very, like, I wouldn't say purposeful, but in this way that was like, you are not allowed here. And so they did leave. And it was just a way just to sort out who was the biggest male.
Yeah.
And then that guy showed up and she's like, okie dokie, this is on.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't the behavior as we interpreted it with our sort of human perspective. It was something a little bit different. It was interesting.
That is super interesting. And it makes me think of the whole field of cryptic female choice and how we don't know a lot about it. For the audience, this is basically, once sperm transfer, for all intents and purposes, has happened, once a male has copulated with a female, researchers all over the animal kingdom are finding out that female bodies, physiologies, behaviors, all kinds of things actually can and do contribute to specific male success. Right. Would you say this is another one of those areas that just hasn't been looked at, or has it more?
This, I think, is a female choice, right? It's instead of, like antlers clashing, right? She's the one doing the sorting, but it's obviously not really particularly cryptic because we can all see what was going on. I wonder about the word cryptic because I feel like it kind of casts aspersions on, I know this is going to sound like, ooh, the patriarchy, but it's true. And I think that language.
True. Good point. Yeah, no, good point.
Language that gets chosen, like, women hiding things, or the females are hiding things, and, there's like, diabolically leaking cues,
right? Like, no.
Read the language, you read it enough and you kind of get sick of this being called a cryptic thing, which largely it's called that because we just haven't looked.
Wow, such a good point.
Is it cryptic to us, or is it cryptic to the species we're talking about? I don't think we really have good answers to that. So
do you have a feeling about it for the elephant seals?
For the elephant seals? Clearly not, because we were all just like, holy cow. So no, I think we actually should be careful about that. So.
I agree. Thank you for that. It's so true. And another point where your book really corrected me and my thinking is in the your description of the hyena genitalia, because it's a really great story. I love talking about crazy female hyenas.
Yeah.
And they're referred to as masculinized.
Yep.
And I read the book and I'm like, no, maybe not then. So what would you call them?
Well, so they have I once did an ultrasound on a hyena, actually. Yeah, that's a story for a different time. But really? they are cast in terms. They have a very long clitoris, and they are cast in terms of what would how language works. If you cast it as a contrast, then the thing against which you are contrasting it is the norm, or what should be the dominant thing, right? And so when they describe the clitoris of these hyenas, which is really long, they describe them as clitoral pseudopenises.
Yeah, that's right.
And I just think, why couldn't they just call it an exceptional clitoris?
It's such a good point. Why is it pretending to be a penis? Like, I
call it a penis when it's not. And I mean, there are distinctions between those two things. And I feel like if we had been naming things and we came across an animal where perhaps the penis was not super impressive, and women were naming things, maybe we call it, the short penile pseudoclitorises or something. I don't know. I think language matters.
I think language matters a lot, and actually the inherent biases that we ascribe to things without even realizing it. And that, I think that's another reason why I just loved your book so much, that it really framed sex in a different way. It really called out all the ways that we can be informed by sex, and how really academia maybe contributes to that as well.
Absolutely.
I have one more piece that from yours. I want to read this one quote that you end the book with, because I think it is just so telling. So your last paragraph. This book began by censoring the penis, but it progressed with the purpose to contextualizing our genitalia among other organs of sexual behavior, showing the endless forms most beautiful that animals use to establish intimacy and sexual interaction. Species-centrically, I think that among the most fascinating of these forms is the human mind. I agree. It is an organ for sexuality And unlike the penis, it is not a proposed stand-in for who we are. It is who we are. The human mind deserves to be recentered as the most fundamental element of our sexual behaviors, and we should focus more on using it for these purposes wisely and well. Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think so many people who find themselves on different parts of the sexual spectrum in different situations, this was very meaningful for me. Where do you think other animals would use their brains more than they would use their genitalia as well?
In terms of like
Choices,
cooperation,
intimacy.
choices, intimacy, I do think that when you the pattern is there, at least it was to me in this book, and you see it all over the place, is that if you see genitalia that don't have a lot of features in comparison to everything that's out there, like scrapers and claws and hooks and spikes and things that look like a
Eagle.
cactus, etc., you know, that is a signal that intimacy is important. And I think that that also probably, in a lot of cases, will be associated with being pro-social and will be associated with using your brain. I use mind and brain interchangeably here.
Mhm.
To connect with someone else. And there's so much more that's important about that connection than just like what you're going to do with your genitalia once you make it.
100%. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Emily. I just could talk to you for hours about your book and all these wonderful examples, but I want to thank you so much for sharing with us and my audiences. And yeah, wow, what an interesting, wonderful book. Everyone, it's called Phallacy. Phallacy, Life Lessons from the Animal Penis. This is really a very feminist book, and I love it. So please get it. And thank you, Emily, so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my God, so good to talk to you.
Yeah, it's good to see
Hey, take good care. I know it's crazy times out there right now, so stay safe.
you too. You too.
Sure. All right, man.
All righty.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.